Mate, this is the climactic battle, and I'm the only one rocking the power of friendship. You've got no chance. You better knock out a backstory flashback toot sweet, or it'll be a total walkover. Shirtaloon, he who fights with monsters.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses. Today's episode is mostly because I'm very excited about this particular genre finding its feet. For quite a long time, it's been very hit and miss, and we're becoming a lot more consistent as more authors reach into the LitRPG world.
This is like when you're a DM, but you can't actually get any of your players together, so you just write a campaign into a story.
It's a very common experience for people who are both authors and tabletop players to see a moment and go, this would make for a great book. The solution to that is, yes, writing it. Write selfishly. If you're loving the story, tell us that story. LitRPGs are a subsection of fantasy that aren't necessarily in the style of a lot of the classic fantasy, where it's very intricate and verbose and huge word counts and these kind of things. It's written closer to fantasy action fun, which is more my vibe. It often has game mechanics and these kinds of things. That is a signature of the LitRPG.
These are often in a fantasy or gaming style of world, often a portal fantasy where they are in our world and then get put into a game world. Sometimes it's through virtual reality. Sometimes it is through magic mumbo jumbo. It's up to you how you want them to be part of this. But the main basis is that the world that they go to is structured much like the world of an RPG, whether that is a video game or tabletop game.
More often than not, you're going to have that single main character instead of the team mentality that you have with most tabletop RPGs. The main character might have a team around them, but it's a single point of view, first person a lot of the time. Sometimes it's third person, but that immersion of their experience of how their world has changed by adding game mechanics is a lot of the fun of the genre.
And much like game worlds themselves, there's no end. There's no end to Faerun. There's just another story, another plot line to pursue within the same world. And that's largely how LitRPGs are structured. They mostly just have a beginning and a middle. They'll have fights with BBEGs, but then another one will pop up and it's bigger and badder, so it's still kind of the middle.
That's not to say there aren't landmarks to express progress. That is also a very important part of this style of writing, is recognizing that the character is making progress. But the finale isn't necessarily something we have well defined or attained. It's just the character needs to get stronger in order to fight the continual rising of bad guys in the world.
If you're not a fan of structure, then this style would be fun for you to try. Because again, there's no real end. You just kind of keep having the fun middle. The adventure, the side story, the whatever comes along the way. If it's fun, let's do it.
If you're having trouble imagining that, think of your favorite TV show, where the writers are always setting up the characters for one more season, a little bit more. We're going to have them keep going. Sam and Dean are going to come back to life. These kinds of setting yourself up for continuously moving forward. There is a very clear beginning, but the end is a lot less well defined, because then we feel like the characters are failures if they don't succeed, if we can clearly define what the ending is.
And part of the reason for this lack of structure, the lack of end, is because most often LitRPGs, especially in their beginning, came out as blog-style stories, where they were released a chapter or two at a time on platforms like Royal Road or Wattpad or whatever, so that they're released similarly to the style of fan fiction, where you can just keep going. So long as you have ideas left for that story, you can just keep posting the next chapter and the next. Common platforms these days are Vela, Ream, Patreon, Royal Road again, where you can get paid for each chapter that gets released.
Okay, I'm sold. What do I need to know before I write a LitRPG based on my D&D game or this D&D game that I want to both DM and play all the characters and write all the rules for?
Most importantly, you need to know your world before the story begins. Because the world, the structure of it, the magic, everything we've basically talked about up to this point this month, you need to know all of that in order to start writing. Because you really shouldn't do any retconning because you need suddenly somebody to have an ability you hadn't set up for before.
You can set up the fact that your character doesn't know everything, and the gods can change the rules and these other pieces if you absolutely need to. Now is the time to set that up right at the beginning. But for the most part, having a thorough understanding of how the world works, at least from your character's point of view, can give you a really solid foundation. I actually think Lee would be really good at writing this style because she loves the intricate world building before she even begins to sit down to write. And then everything else is just flying by the seat of her pants, which would make for a great, solid foundation for the story and the world that the character is dropped into. And then whatever happens to the characters happens. The characters can make their own decisions within the world, and you understand the bounds very well.
Maybe that's what I need to do with Amethyst and Emeralds, just making a LitRPG.
I would 100% read that.
So before you get started, you want to have the stat sheets ready. You want to have, at the very least, the basic structure of what people can do, the magic systems, the world systems, the game mechanics, essentially. And you can build and expand on them later, so long as you have that good foundation to begin.
And it's very common in LitRPGs for the main character to have some sort of character sheet that they can access. Having that designed ahead of time and having their stats written out would be super helpful in making sure that everything stays consistent in your notes over in this other document over here that doesn't necessarily need to be released. Helps you keep track of how many of this and that are happening. I honestly think having a character sheet would be a superpower in and of itself. And that might have to enter my story at some point. Because you can look at the stats and go, oh, well, my constitution's a lot higher than my dexterity. That's good to know. Or
even though the basic story structure has kind of been thrown out of the window, once you know your world, you should have some measurable path to success. The stat sheets, classes, building, whatever, that is going to be part of it. Some sort of ranking system that the character can progress along so that they know they are getting better, that they are building skill. There's a lot of ways that you see that in the gaming world where you have different levels, and at different levels you gain different abilities, and each thing that you do gives you XP in order to level up.
Power scaling can be a very difficult thing for designing these, so if you can nail that down, that would be awesome. By power scaling, I mean the bad guy doesn't necessarily have more hit points. It's a bigger challenge. The more power that the main character has, the opposition is scaling that much faster, so that the challenge is always slightly outpacing your main character. When you're writing these kinds of stories, the overall goal of the story should be kind of elusive. In Dungeon Crawler Carl, it's literally just don't die, which is an ongoing goal. Something like He Who Fights with Monsters, it's get more powerful. In Dominion of Blades, it's I need to find other people like me. While each of these are good goals for the characters, it's not something that can ever actually be achieved to its completion.
Because the goal of survive, you just kind of have to keep going until finally you don't. The length of these also tend to be on the longer side. So before we said that most of them get published first in a blog format, and then later, like in the case of He Who Fights with Monsters, they will take chunks of that blog format and make it a full book. And they tend to be longer, 130,000 words on the short side. But the chapters are fairly short. 2,000 to 3,000 words because they're being posted in blog format. So you get a lot of chapters in the formatted book later.
Yeah, the first He Who Fights with Monsters book has something like 120 plus chapters to it. It's a lot of chapters.
Because it is this blog format with no real end, Choosing the end of the book can be a little bit difficult, but you'll want to find those points where you can tell the characters building towards this, where they maybe finally encountered A, B, B, E, G, and then it can end on that yes, but moment.
And that yes, but is going to be a skill that you should be very good at. If it's not something that you necessarily have now, this will force you to practice it a whole bunch. Because that but is what sets you up for the next chunk of story, even though the yes makes it feel like the character is competent and accomplished something. Another side note about writing these is kind of like a TV show. It's completely acceptable to have a previously on. Here we are going to recap these brief moments of the things that you need to know in order to have this chapter make sense. Because it's released over many years, much like a D&D game, don't forget about this one thing we mentioned 3 months ago can be very helpful in the story. This one random item that we picked up forever ago is now finally going to become relevant, and maybe I should remind you where and how we got it. So even if you don't decide to publish your LitRPG, consider writing down the stories. If nothing else, they make for great memories to have and share with the rest of your gaming group. These games, these moments when you play, can be great writing prompts. And it will really help you connect with both the writing and the character that you're playing across both ways. And through that, you can write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.